The bull charged toward the Whitlock crew. Garrett yelled, "Stop!" but nobody listened. 4 men with tranquilizer guns surrounded the massive black bull who'd appeared in Garrett's pasture after a violent Montana storm. The corporate rancher demanded, "He's ours. Step aside." But something felt terribly wrong. When Garrett scanned the bull's hidden microchip, the name made his blood run cold. Experimental Genetics Program. This wasn't just any bull. This was 3 years of secret research that had just escaped. They gave him 48 hours to return an $800,000 secret. But what Garrett discovered about where this bull had been and why they desperately wanted him back would force him to risk everything he owned for a bull that wasn't even his. Garrett Thornhill had been ranching in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana for 32 years, and he'd learned to read weather the way some men read newspapers. On that particular Tuesday in late August, the sky carried the greenish-yellow tinge that promised violent storms, the kind that swept down from the mountains with hail and winds strong enough to flatten corn and splinter fence posts that had stood for decades. He'd spent the afternoon securing what he could, moving equipment into the barn, checking that his 12 Hereford cows were in the protected pasture near the house, ensuring the generator had fuel in case the power went out. His operation was modest. 240 acres of decent grazing land, a small herd he could manage alone since his wife Linda had passed 4 years ago, enough work to keep him busy without breaking his 54-year-old body. The storm hit around 7 p.m. with the fury Montana was famous for. Garrett stood at his kitchen window watching lightning crack the sky in jagged brilliance, counting the seconds between flash and thunder to gauge distance. 3 miles, 2 miles. Then, the thunder and lightning came simultaneously, and he knew the storm was directly overhead. The wind arrived next. Gusts that bent the cottonwood trees nearly horizontal, that ripped shingles from his barn roof and sent them cartwheeling across the yard like playing cards. Rain came in sheets so thick Garrett couldn't see his barn 50 yards away. Then hail. First pea-sized, then marble-sized, then golf ball-sized chunks of ice hammering his roof with sounds like gunfire. It lasted 40 minutes. When the storm finally passed, leaving behind that peculiar golden light that sometimes follows violent weather, Garrett pulled on his boots and jacket and went outside to assess damage. His barn had lost maybe 30 shingles, but the structure was sound. The chicken coop had a broken window. Several fence sections were down. He could see that even from a distance. Posts snapped like matchsticks where the wind had caught them wrong. But it was the east pasture gate that made his stomach drop. The heavy metal gate that separated his property from his neighbor's ranch, the Whitlock place, 800 acres owned by a corporate operation out of Billings that Garrett had never even met, had been torn completely off its hinges and lay twisted in the mud 30 feet from where it should have been. "Damn," Garrett muttered, already calculating the cost of replacement and the work involved. But then a more immediate concern hit him. With that gate down, there was nothing preventing Whitlock's cattle from wandering onto his property, or his cattle from wandering onto theirs. He walked the fence line as the sun set, checking for breaches, looking for any sign that livestock had already crossed. His 12 Herefords were all accounted for, huddled together near the barn, stressed from the storm but unhurt. But as he walked back toward the house in the fading light, he saw something that stopped him cold. In his west pasture, the 20-acre section where he'd been planning to move his cows next week, stood a massive bull. Black, probably Angus, easily 2,200 pounds. The animal was alone, calmly grazing as if he'd been there his whole life, completely unconcerned with the fact that he was in the wrong pasture on the wrong ranch. Garrett's pulse quickened. He didn't own a bull, hadn't kept one in 4 years, since before Linda died. He bred his cows through artificial insemination, finding it safer and more manageable for a solo operation. Which meant this bull had wandered onto his property through that broken gate, and Garrett was now responsible for a 2,200-pound animal that didn't belong to him. He approached carefully, years of ranching experience telling him to read the bull's body language before getting too close. Some bulls were docile, others were walking time bombs of testosterone and aggression that could kill a man without much effort. This one watched Garrett's approach with calm interest, not lowering his head or pawing the ground. Good signs, but not guarantees. "Easy there, big guy," Garrett said softly, stopping about 20 feet away. You're a long way from home." The bull regarded him with dark, intelligent eyes, then returned to grazing. No aggression, no fear. Just a bull doing what bulls do, completely unaware that his presence created a significant problem for the rancher whose property he'd invaded. Garrett pulled out his phone and called the number he'd found months ago for Whitlock Ranch's main office. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. "This is Garrett Thornhill on the adjacent property to your eastern boundary. Storm damaged the fence line between our ranches. You've got a bull that's wandered onto my property. Need someone to come get him as soon as possible. Call me back." He tried 2 more numbers he'd managed to find for Whitlock Ranch operations, getting voicemails on both. Corporate ranches, he thought bitterly. Nobody actually there after business hours, probably management and Billings who wouldn't check messages until morning. Which meant Garrett was stuck with this bull until someone from Whitlock could retrieve him. He'd have to keep him separated from his Herefords. Mixing an unknown bull with his cows without planning was asking for problems. The West Pasture would work for containment, at least temporarily, since it had good fencing on all sides except the broken section. But as Garrett walked back to his house in the deepening darkness, his boots squelching in mud from the storm, he felt uneasy in a way he couldn't quite name. Something about that bull bothered him, not his temperament. The animal seemed remarkably calm. Not his size. Big, yes. But Garrett had worked with large bulls before. It was the way the bull had looked at him, with an awareness, an intelligence that seemed almost human. The way he'd assessed Garrett, measured him, and then made a conscious decision that this human wasn't a threat. Bulls weren't supposed to think that way. They were supposed to be simple creatures of instinct and aggression, driven by testosterone and territorial impulse. But this bull had looked at Garrett like he was making calculations, processing information, arriving at conclusions. Garrett shook off the thought. He was tired, stressed from the storm, probably reading too much into simple animal behavior. The bull was just a bull, a very large, very calm bull who'd wandered through a broken gate and would be picked up tomorrow. Except as Garrett would discover over the following days, nothing about this situation was as simple as it seemed. The bull standing in his west pasture wasn't just any bull, and the broken gate that had sent him to Garrett's ranch wasn't random chance. It was the beginning of a series of events that would challenge everything Garrett thought he understood about cattle, about corporate ranching operations, and about the length some people would go to hide what should never have been hidden. The wrong bull had ended up in his pasture. But as Garrett would soon learn, sometimes the wrong thing arriving at exactly the right time is the only way the truth gets told. Garrett woke the next morning to his phone ringing at 6:15 a.m., earlier than he usually got up, but ranchers learned to expect calls at inconvenient hours. He grabbed the phone from his nightstand, expecting Whitlock Ranch calling about their bull. Instead, it was his neighbor to the south, Dale Morrison, a 60-year-old rancher who'd been working Montana land even longer than Garrett. "Garrett, you all right? Storm hit you hard last night?" "Lost some fence, including the gate between me and Whitlock Ranch. Got one of their bulls wandering onto my property through the break." "Why?" "Because I got a call this morning from Whitlock's head of operations, guy named Preston Vance, asking if I'd seen any of their livestock on my land. Said they're missing a bull and a couple cows after the storm. Wanted to know if I'd check my fence lines." Garrett sat up, suddenly more awake. "Missing? They don't know where their own cattle are?" "Corporate ranch," Dale said with the disdain that small, independent operators reserved for large agricultural corporations. 800 acres, probably 200 head of cattle, and I'd bet money they don't have accurate counts. They run that place like a factory, not a ranch. After hanging up with Dale, Garrett tried calling Whitlock Ranch again. This time someone answered. A woman with a clipped professional voice that suggested she worked in an office, not a barn. "Whitlock Ranch Operations, this is Stephanie." "This is Garrett Thornhill. I'm on the property adjacent to your eastern boundary. I left messages yesterday about a bull that came through our broken fence line onto my property during the storm." "Oh yes, Mr. Thornhill. I have your messages here. Mr. Vance wanted me to ask you to describe the bull, please." Garrett found the request odd. Wouldn't they know what their own bull looked like? "Black Angus, approximately 2,200 pounds, probably 3 to 4 years old. Very calm temperament. He's in my west pasture." There was a pause, and Garrett heard typing. "Can you tell me if the bull has any identifying marks? Brands, tags, anything?" Haven't gotten that close to check tags, Garrett admitted. But I didn't see any brands from a distance. Should I be looking for something specific? Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Thornhill, let me transfer you to Mr. Vance. The hold music was interrupted after 30 seconds by a man's voice, deep, authoritative, with the careful tone of someone choosing words deliberately. Mr. Thornhill, this is Preston Vance, Operations Manager for Whitlock Ranch. Thank you for reporting the bull. We'll send someone to retrieve him today. In the meantime, I need you to do something for me. What's that? Don't approach the bull. Don't try to move him. Don't let anyone else near him. Just leave him where he is until our team arrives. Garrett felt his hackles rise at being given orders about livestock on his own property. Mr. Vance, with respect, I've been ranching for 32 years. I know how to handle a bull. I'm sure you do. Vance's voice carried a placating tone that somehow made things worse. But this particular animal is valuable. Very valuable. We just want to ensure he's retrieved safely without incident. Our team will be there within 2 hours. The call ended before Garrett could respond. He stared at his phone, feeling the same unease he'd felt the night before. Something about this situation didn't sit right. Vance's insistence that he stay away from the bull, the questions about identifying marks, the emphasis on the animal being valuable. Garrett pulled on his work clothes and headed outside. The morning was clear and cool, yesterday's storm leaving behind air so clean it almost hurt to breathe. He walked to the west pasture, coffee mug in hand, ostensibly just checking on the bull, but actually intending to get a closer look at what had Whitlock Ranch so concerned. The bull was exactly where Garrett had left him, grazing peacefully in the morning light. This close, in daylight, Garrett could see details he'd missed the night before. The animal was in exceptional condition, glossy coat, perfect body weight, muscle definition that suggested careful management and premium nutrition. This wasn't a range bull left to fend for himself. This was an animal that had been receiving specialized care. Garrett walked along the fence line, studying the bull from different angles, looking for the brands or tags that any registered cattle should have. Montana law required identification on all cattle over 6 months old, but as Garrett circled the pasture perimeter, he saw nothing. No ear tags, no brands on the hide, no visible tattoos. A bull this valuable, as Vance had described him, should have been marked 6 ways to Sunday. Registration papers, breed association tattoos, ranch brands, valuable breeding bulls were documented meticulously. Yet this bull had no identification Garrett could see, which meant either this wasn't actually Whitlock's bull, or Whitlock Ranch was running unregistered cattle. Neither option made sense. Garrett was still puzzling over this when he heard the rumble of diesel engines coming up his driveway. He checked his watch. 7:45 a.m. Not quite 2 hours, but close. Whitlock Ranch was taking this seriously. 2 large trucks pulled into his yard, a dually pickup and a livestock trailer designed for moving large animals. 4 men climbed out, all wearing Whitlock Ranch uniforms with company logos. The man in front, mid-40s, military-bearing, expensive boots, extended his hand with the calculated friendliness of corporate management. Mr. Thornhill? Preston Vance. We spoke on the phone. Thanks for your patience with this situation. Garrett shook his hand, noting the soft palm that hadn't done manual labor in years. Bull's in the west pasture. Hasn't given me any trouble. Excellent. We'll get him loaded and out of your hair immediately. Vance turned to his crew. Thompson, Carter, get the equipment. Standard protocol, just like we discussed. Standard protocol, Garrett noticed, apparently involved 2 men carrying cattle prods, another with a heavy-duty tranquilizer dart gun, and the 4th with what looked like ultrasound equipment. That was excessive for loading one calm bull. Seems like a lot of firepower for an animal that's been grazing peacefully since he got here, Garrett observed. Can't be too careful, Vance said smoothly. Like I mentioned, he's extremely valuable. We don't take chances. They walked to the west pasture, and Garrett watched as Vance's team set up with military efficiency. 2 men positioning themselves at angles with the tranquilizer gun, one standing ready with the ultrasound equipment, and Carter approaching the bull with careful, measured steps. The bull, who'd been calm with Garrett, immediately tensed when Carter got within 30 feet. His head came up, his body language shifting from relaxed to alert. Not aggressive, Garrett noted, but definitely wary. Like he recognized these men and didn't trust them. "Easy, big guy," Carter said, but his voice carried none of the genuine calm Garrett had used the night before. This was performance calm, the kind nervous people use around unpredictable animals. The bull took 3 steps backward. "Thompson, be ready with the dart," Vance called. "Wait," Garrett said. "Give me a minute." Garrett climbed over the fence before Vance could object, his rancher's instincts overriding corporate protocols. He'd worked with difficult cattle for 3 decades, and something told him these men from Whitlock Ranch were making the situation worse with their aggressive approach. "Mr. Thornhill, I really don't think," Vance started, but Garrett was already walking toward the bull, his movements slow and deliberate, his posture non-threatening. "Easy, big guy," Garrett said, using the same tone that had worked the night before. "Nobody's going to hurt you." The bull watched him approach, body still tense but not retreating further. Garrett stopped about 15 feet away, giving the animal space to assess him, to remember that this human had been different from the others. After a long moment, the bull's stance relaxed slightly, not fully calm, but no longer on the edge of panic. "He trusts you," Vance observed from the fence, and Garrett heard something in his voice that wasn't quite surprise, but wasn't quite expectation either. Like Vance had been hoping for exactly this response. Garrett took another careful step forward, then another. The bull allowed him to approach within arm's reach, and Garrett gently placed a hand on the animal's massive shoulder. This close, he could examine what he hadn't been able to see from a distance. No ear tags, no brands. But there, on the bull's right rear leg, partially hidden by the thick black coat, a small scar. Not from injury, but surgical. Precise. The kind of mark left by professional veterinary work. Garrett ran his hand along the bull's hide, feeling for what he suspected was there. And found it. A tiny hard lump under the skin near the shoulder blade. A microchip implant, the kind used for premium breeding stock, positioned where it couldn't be seen or felt without deliberate searching. "He's chipped," Garrett called to Vance. "You'll need a scanner to read it." Vance's expression changed, just for a second, a micro-expression of concern quickly covered by professional neutrality. "Thompson, bring the scanner." Thompson climbed into the pasture carrying a handheld RFID scanner, the kind that could read identification chips from several inches away. But as he approached, the bull's body language shifted again, becoming agitated. The animal recognized Thompson specifically, Garrett realized, and whatever association existed between them wasn't positive. "Let me do it," Garrett said, taking the scanner from Thompson's hands before the man could protest. He activated it and held it near the bull's shoulder where he'd felt the chip. The scanner beeped and displayed a registration number, but it was the name that made Garrett's blood run cold. Titan's Dominion, Experimental Genetics Program, Whitlock Bioag Research Division. Bioag Research? Garrett looked at Vance, who'd gone very still. "I thought Whitlock Ranch was a cattle operation, not a research facility." "We have multiple divisions," Vance said carefully. "Titan's Dominion is part of a genetics improvement program we've been running for 3 years. Selective breeding for enhanced traits. Completely legal and above board." But Garrett's 32 years of ranching experience told him when someone was lying. Enhanced traits like what? And why isn't he branded if he's so valuable? Why the secrecy? "Mr. Thornhill, I appreciate your help, but this is proprietary corporate information." "This bull showed up on my property," Garrett interrupted, his voice hardening. "That makes it my business. Now you can tell me what's going on, or I can make some calls to the Montana Department of Livestock and ask them to explain why Whitlock Ranch is running unregistered experimental cattle." The threat hung in the air between them. Vance's jaw tightened, and for a moment Garrett thought the man might simply order his crew to tranquilize the bull and leave. But then Vance's shoulders sagged slightly, the posture of someone calculating odds and realizing he'd lost. "Titan's Dominion isn't registered with breed associations because he can't be," Vance said quietly. 3 years ago, Whitlock Bioag began a genetic modification program. Nothing radical, just selective breeding combined with genomic selection to enhance growth rates, feed efficiency, and disease resistance. Titan was one of the first successes. His growth metrics exceed natural Angus standards by 40%. His feed conversion is unprecedented. He's worth approximately $800,000 in research investment. Garrett felt his stomach drop. You're saying he's genetically modified, like GMO crops? Not modified in the laboratory sense. More like accelerated selective breeding using genetic markers. But the semantics don't matter. What matters is that Titan can't be registered or branded because doing so would require disclosure of our research methods, which are trade secrets. He's been kept isolated in our research facility for 3 years. Until the storm, Garrett said, pieces clicking together. The broken gate wasn't between your main ranch and my property. It was between your research facility and my property. He didn't wander from your cattle herd. He escaped from a lab. Vance nodded reluctantly. The research facility is on the eastern edge of our property. The storm damaged containment fencing. Titan got out before we could secure the breach. We've been searching for him since yesterday evening. Garrett looked at the bull, Titan, who stood calmly beside him, seemingly oblivious to the fact that he represented 3 years of corporate research and nearly $1 million in investment. An animal who'd been kept isolated for his entire life, used for experiments, never allowed to simply be a bull doing what bulls naturally do. So what happens now? Garrett asked, though he was already forming his own answer. We tranquilize him, transport him back to the facility, and continue the research program, Vance said. And Mr. Thornhill, I need to be very clear about something. What I've told you is confidential. Whitlock Bioag has significant resources and excellent legal representation. If word gets out about our research program before we're ready to publish findings, you'll sue me into bankruptcy, Garrett finished. I get it. Corporate agriculture protecting its investments. But as Garrett stood in his pasture with his hand on Titan's shoulder, feeling the animal's calm trust, he realized he was facing a decision that had nothing to do with legal threats or corporate research. This bull had been a prisoner for 3 years. He'd escaped during a storm and ended up on Garrett's property by pure chance. Or maybe something more than chance. And now Garrett had to decide whether to let Whitlock take him back or do something that would probably cost him everything he'd built in 32 years of ranching. The wrong bull had come through that broken gate. But maybe, Garrett thought, it was exactly the right bull at exactly the right time. Garrett looked at Preston Vance, then back at Titan, and made a decision that his practical ranching mind told him was insane, but his gut insisted was right. No. Vance's expression shifted from professional courtesy to cold corporate authority. Excuse me? I said no, you're not taking him. Garrett's voice was steady despite his racing heart. This bull showed up on my property. Montana law says when livestock crosses onto your land, and the owner can't be immediately determined, the livestock becomes the responsibility of the landowner until ownership is legally established. Mr. Thornhill, we just established ownership. The microchip shows a registration number for an experimental animal that's not legally documented with any breed association or state agricultural department, Garrett interrupted, which means proving ownership requires more than a proprietary scanner. It requires documentation you probably don't want to submit to county authorities because it would expose your research program. Vance's face flushed. You're making a serious mistake. Whitlock Bioag will what? Sue me for following Montana livestock laws? Go ahead. That lawsuit will require you to explain in open court why you're running undocumented genetic research on cattle. I'm betting the negative publicity alone would cost your company more than this bull's worth. The standoff lasted 30 seconds that felt like hours. Garrett could see Vance calculating, weighing options, probably mentally conferring with lawyers and corporate executives who weren't present. Finally, Vance's expression hardened into something between respect and fury. You have 48 hours, Mr. Thornhill. After that, we'll have documentation that will satisfy any court in Montana, and we'll be back with county sheriff's support if necessary. Enjoy your temporary victory. Vance and his crew left without another word, their trucks kicking up dust as they drove away too fast. Garrett stood alone in his pasture with a bull worth $800,000 that he'd just refused to return to its legal owner, and the reality of what he'd done crashed over him like cold water. He'd probably just destroyed his own life. Whitlock Bioag had resources he couldn't match, They'd bury him in legal fees, tie up his ranch in litigation, make his life hell until he surrendered. All for a bull who wasn't even his. Except... Garrett looked at Titan, who was grazing calmly as if corporate espionage and legal threats didn't concern him. This bull had spent 3 years in isolation, used as an experimental subject, treated as property rather than a living being. The storm had given him 48 hours of freedom, of standing in open pasture under Montana sky, of being a bull instead of a research specimen. Garrett couldn't give him back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Well, Titan," Garrett said quietly, "I've either done the stupidest thing of my life or the most important. Not sure which yet." Titan raised his massive head, looked directly at Garrett with those remarkably intelligent eyes, and Garrett could have sworn the bull understood exactly what had just happened and exactly what it meant. For the first time in 4 years, since Linda's death, Garrett felt like his life had purpose beyond simple survival. He was protecting something that couldn't protect itself, standing up to corporate power that assumed compliance, doing what was right instead of what was safe. The wrong bull had come through that broken gate. But in 48 hours, Garrett was going to have to decide just how far he was willing to go to keep him. Garrett spent the next 48 hours making calls. First to his lawyer, who told him he was legally insane but agreed to help. Then to Dale Morrison and 3 other neighboring ranchers who'd fought corporate agriculture encroachment for years. Finally, to a reporter from the Billings Gazette who'd been writing about agricultural ethics. By the time Whitlock's trucks returned, this time with a county sheriff and legal documentation, Garrett's small ranch was no longer empty. 15 neighboring ranchers stood with him at his fence line, their presence a silent statement that this wasn't just about one man and one bull anymore. The reporter's article had already gone live online. Genetic research or animal rights, Montana rancher challenges corporate agriculture. Within hours, it had been picked up by agricultural news services across 3 states. Preston Vance stepped out of his truck, saw the crowd, and his expression shifted from confident authority to careful calculation. The sheriff, a man named Tom Weber, who'd known Garrett for 20 years, looked uncomfortable with his role in the situation. "Garrett," Sheriff Weber said quietly, "they've got papers. Legal ownership documentation filed with the state as of this morning. I have to enforce this." "I know, Tom." Garrett's voice was calm. "But I'm asking for a livestock welfare inspection first. If Titan's been kept in experimental isolation for 3 years without proper socialization or range access, that's potential animal cruelty under Montana law. The documentation can wait 24 hours while the state vet does an evaluation. It was a delaying tactic, and everyone knew it. But it was also legally sound. And with reporters present and public attention growing, Whitlock Bioag couldn't risk the optics of forcing the issue." Vance's jaw tightened. "This isn't over, Mr. Thornhill." "No," Garrett agreed. "It's not. But whatever happens next happens in public, with oversight, following laws that protect animals instead of corporate profits. That's all I'm asking for." 3 days later, the state veterinarian's report was damning. Titan showed signs of chronic stress from isolation, inadequate socialization, and containment conditions that violated animal welfare standards. Whitlock Bioag faced significant fines and regulatory oversight of their research program. The company offered Garrett a settlement. They'd drop all legal action if he agreed to confidentiality about their research methods. In exchange, Titan would remain on Garrett's ranch under permanent research partnership that gave Garrett full custody while Whitlock retained genetic rights to any offspring. Garrett accepted. Not because the settlement was generous, but because it meant Titan got to stay exactly where the storm had brought him, in an open pasture under Montana sky, finally allowed to simply be a bull. On a clear September morning, Garrett stood at his fence watching Titan graze peacefully alongside his Hereford cows, and he thought about broken gates and wrong bulls and how sometimes the best things in life arrive by accident. The wrong bull had come to his pasture. But Garrett wouldn't change a single thing about how it all turned out, even if it had cost him everything. Because some battles were worth fighting, and some lives were worth protecting, regardless of the cost. Titan raised his head, met Garrett's eyes across the pasture, and Garrett could have sworn the bull understood exactly what they'd both survived, and exactly what they'd both won.